"Will you be our ma forever?" asked the ranch kids kneeling on the barn floor. The hinges on the barn door needed grease. Had needed it since October, maybe September, and every morning I hauled it open it made that same long complaint, iron dragging on iron. And every morning I told myself I'd get to it, and then I didn't. Small things like that. The way a place starts talking to you when you stop listening. I was splitting wood the morning Clara Marsh rode in off the Kettering Road. Not the back road. The main one. Which meant she wasn't lost, wasn't turned around, she knew where she was going and she came straight up the center of it, sitting a roan mare like she'd been doing it since before she could walk, which I found out later she basically had. Her father ran horses up near Billings, but that was later. I heard the hooves and I didn't stop splitting. You get to a point where you're not curious about much. I had 2 chords to get through before the real cold set in, and the axe head was singing clean that morning, and I was in the rhythm of it, the kind you don't want to break. So I kept at it, and I heard her pull up, and I heard her get down, and I heard her boots in the dirt, all before I looked. "You're Ilya's vein," she said, not a question. "I am. Martha Pell sent me. Said you've got 3 children and no help and you're about to go under." I set the axe down. She was maybe 40, 42. Dark hair gone half gray at the temples. Good coat, not fancy. Brown eyes that look straight at you without working at it. "Martha Pell talks too much," I said. "She does," she agreed. "I still need work and you still need help, so here I am." That was the beginning of it. Not a pretty beginning. Not the kind you put in a story if you were trying to tell one that sounds right. I wasn't looking for anyone. I wasn't looking for anything except to get the wood split and the winter survived and my 3 kids into spring with their boots on their feet. Jessie was 12. Owen was 9. Me was 6 and still woke up crying for her mother 2 or 3 nights a week. And when she did, I'd sit on the edge of her bed in the dark and not know what to say, because there was nothing to say. So I'd just sit there with my hand on her back until she went quiet again. Ruth had been gone 14 months. I didn't hire Clara that day. I told her I'd think on it, which was a lie. I'd already mostly decided against it because I didn't want a stranger in the house, didn't want the kids getting attached to somebody who'd be gone in the spring. That's how I thought then. Keep things small. Don't let anything in that can leave. She didn't argue, she just said, "I'll be at the Kettering Inn through Saturday." And she got back on that roan and rode out the same way she'd come, straight up the center. I got through another cord of wood that day. Then I went inside and made supper, beans and salt pork and biscuits that came out too flat, and Jessie didn't say anything about the biscuits, which meant she'd given up saying things, which was its own kind of hurt. Owen ate his without looking up. Me pushed hers around and asked if we could get a dog. I said maybe. After they were in bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp low and thought about Ruth. Not her face, exactly, I could still call that up, still could, but the way the house had been when she was in it. Sound. Wait. The particular creak of the floorboard outside the bedroom when she came in late from checking on the animals. The house had a different sound to it now. Thinner. Like something had been taken out of the walls. I rode to the Kettering Inn on Thursday. Clara was sitting in the lobby with a book, which surprised me, and she looked up when I came in and didn't say anything. Just waited. "I've got conditions," I said. "Tell me." "You're here to help with the house and the children. That's it. I don't need another hand on the ranch. I've got Denny Pratt 2 mornings a week, and that covers what I can't cover." "All right. The children are not yours to manage the way you'd manage your own. You advise me. You don't decide." "Understood. And if it's not working, either way, we say so plain and part without hard feelings." She folded her book closed. "Mr. Vane, I buried a husband 4 years ago. I ran his sheep operation for 2 years after that before his brothers contested the estate and won it in court. I've been doing day work since. I know what hard is and I know what plain talk is, and I'm not afraid of either one." She stood up. "You want me to start Monday?" I said yes. She was good with the children in a way I hadn't expected, not soft with them, not trying to fill a hole she knew better than to try and fill, but steady. She didn't make a fuss. She cooked better than I did, which wasn't saying much, but she also cooked things they actually ate without negotiating over it. She got the house cleaner than it had been in over a year. She fixed the loose step on the back porch herself, without telling me. I just noticed it one evening and realized it didn't rock anymore. Me took to her first. That wasn't a surprise. Me was 6 and still reaching for things to hold. Within 2 weeks, she'd started following Clara around the kitchen the way she used to follow Ruth. And I'd catch myself watching from the doorway with something in my chest that I didn't know what to do with. So I'd go back outside and find something that needed doing. Owen was wary. He's like me that way. He watches a thing for a long time before he decides about it. He was polite to her but distant, and I didn't push him either direction. Some things need time and you can't manufacture it. Jessie was harder to read. She was 12, and she'd been trying to be the woman of the house for 14 months, and she wasn't about to give that up easy. First couple weeks she'd redo things Clara had done, wipe down a counter that was already clean, refold something that was already folded, and I could see Clara notice it and decide not to say anything, which was the right call. Jessie needed to find her way to it on her own. The thing that turned Jessie was the sewing. Clara found Ruth's sewing basket in the sideboard and brought it out one evening without making a ceremony of it, just set it on the table and asked Jessie if she knew how to darn a sock. Jessie said a little. Clara showed her, not performing, not gushing over her, just showing her, the way you show somebody a skill. 2 hours later they were still at the table, working by lamplight, and when I said it was time for bed Jessie looked up at me, and there was something in her face I hadn't seen in a long time. Just a girl, for a minute. Not the one holding everything together. Just a girl learning something with a woman who wasn't making a big thing of it. I told Clara thank you that night, after the kids were in bed. She said she needed somebody to show her things, that's all. Yeah, I said, I know. I went to bed and lay there in the dark and felt the particular weight of a man who knows he's been failing at something and couldn't see how until someone else showed up and did it without even trying hard. I wasn't looking at Clara that way. I want to be clear about that, or at least clear that I wasn't letting myself. What I had with Ruth was the kind of thing that doesn't repeat. You know that going in, I think. You know it's somewhere under everything, and when it's gone you don't go looking for it again because you know better. You put your head down and you do the work and you get your children through. That's what I told myself. November came in cold and fast. The creek froze earlier than I'd seen it in years, and I lost 2 calves to a storm in the 3rd week that I should have seen coming and didn't, and that put me in a hole that I spent 3 nights at the kitchen table trying to figure my way out of. Clara didn't involve herself in the numbers, that wasn't her place and she knew it, but she left coffee on the stove those nights without being asked, and once when I was still up at midnight, I heard her come down and she didn't say anything, just set a cup next to my papers and went back to bed. Small things, the ones that add up. Denny Pratt got himself kicked in the knee by his own mule the 2nd week of November and was laid up for 6 weeks, and that left me short on the ranch at the worst possible time. I didn't tell Clara, or I didn't mean to. What I did was come in for lunch one day and she looked at my face and said, "What happened?" I told her about Denny. She said, "I can work mornings." That's not what I hired you for. I know what you hired me for. I also know how to string fence and I know which end of a calf you pull from. She said it without drama. Jessie's old enough to manage breakfast and get the little ones to school. I'll be back before they get home. I said no. Twice. She didn't argue either time, just looked at me with those even brown eyes, and then she showed up at the barn the next morning at 5:30 in her work clothes. I was too tired to fight it, and honestly, I was glad she was there. That's the part I didn't say. I was glad. She knew cattle. Not as well as she knew horses, but she'd ranched enough to know the rhythms, and she worked hard and she didn't complain, and she didn't need to be told something twice. We'd come in for the noon meal and she'd wash up at the pump and sit down and eat and then go back out. And there was a kind of ease to working alongside her that I hadn't felt with anybody in a long time, maybe ever in that particular way. Ruth hadn't been a ranch woman. She'd been a school teacher, actually, before we married, and she was city-raised and she'd learned what she needed to learn, but she was never comfortable with the animals the way Clara was. Clara was comfortable. She fit the land. I caught myself thinking that one afternoon while we were cutting ice on the creek, and I put the thought away. Owen came around in December. The way it happened was simple. He'd gone out to the barn after school. He liked the barn, liked being near the horses, and Clara was out there treating a cut on the roan's fetlock, and Owen stood in the door and watched. She talked him through what she was doing, not making it a lesson, just explaining as she went. He asked a question. She answered it straight, not softening it or dumbing it down. He asked another. By the time I went out to call him for supper, they were sitting side by side on the stall rail, and she was telling him about the horses her father kept, and Owen had that look he gets when something has genuinely interested him. Like the world got a little bigger. He started coming out to watch her with the horses whenever he could after that. She never made a production of it. Just let him be there. Christmas was the hardest. Always is, that first stretch of years. I'd gotten through one without Ruth, but barely, and I was dreading the second one in a way I hadn't let myself examine too closely. I bought the children what I could: a new coat for Jessie, a pocket knife for Owen, a small china-faced doll for me that cost more than I should have spent. Clara bought them each something too, small things, out of her own wages, and she didn't tell me until I noticed the wrapped packages under the tree and asked. She looked slightly uncomfortable when I asked, like I'd caught her at something. "Wasn't trying to overstep," she said. "You didn't," I said. On Christmas morning, me climbed into Clara's lap at the breakfast table. Just pulled herself up and settled in there like it was an ordinary thing, and Clara's arms came up around her without hesitation, and me looked up at her and said something too quiet for me to hear, and Clara said, "Yes, I am," and me leaned back against her and started in on her breakfast. I don't know what she asked. I didn't ask either of them. The hard night came in late January. It had been building. I could feel it without knowing what it was, that particular pressure in the chest that comes when something has been held too long in a tight space. I'd been out in the cold for 3 days straight dealing with a water situation on the north pasture, sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, eating whatever was quick. Clara had the house running and the children managed, and I knew that, and I was grateful for it, and I didn't say so, not once in those 3 days, because I was too tired and too ground down to say anything at all. I came in the third night and she'd kept supper warm. That's all. She'd kept it warm and she'd set a place and she'd left the lamp on. She wasn't up, it was after 10, but she'd left everything ready. I sat down and ate, and then I didn't move. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough for the lamp to start guttering. I wasn't thinking about anything specific. It was more like everything came down at once. The lost calves and the numbers and Denny's knee and the creek and the 2 cords of wood I still hadn't finished, and me crying at night, and Owen's careful politeness with me, and Jessie doing Ruth's mending, because someone had to, and Ruth not here. Ruth gone 14 months and now 16, and it just kept going. The calendar kept going, and I sat at the table and I put my face in my hands. I heard her on the stairs. Soft. She'd heard me come in, she always did, and she came down in the dark and she stopped in the kitchen doorway and she didn't say anything. She just stood there, and I knew she was there, and after a minute she came and sat down across from me. She didn't touch me, she didn't try to talk me through it. She just sat there. That meant more than I can explain, the not trying to fix it, the just being in the same room. After a while I took my hands down and I looked at her. She looked back. She'd pulled a blanket around her shoulders and her hair was down, and she looked, I don't know, she looked like herself. Real, there. "I'm all right," I said. "I know you are," she said. "You're the most all right man I've ever seen, and it's wearing you to nothing." I didn't say anything to that. She got up and poured me a cup of the coffee she'd left on the back of the stove and set it in front of me, and then she went back to bed. I sat there another hour. Then I slept, and I slept hard, which I hadn't done in 3 days. In the morning, everything was the same. She didn't mention it. I didn't mention it. But something had shifted, the way the air shifts after a storm, same world, different feel to it. February was quieter. The cold stayed, but the worst of the work eased. Denny was back on 2 weeks into the month, still favoring the knee but functional, and I could breathe a little. I started noticing things I'd been too tired to notice. The way Clara moved through the kitchen in the morning, efficient, no wasted motion, but easy about it. The way she talked to me, which was direct but gentle, like she knew me was smarter than she let on, which was true. The way she'd sit in the evenings with whatever she was mending or reading, comfortable in the quiet. Ruth had needed music or conversation in the evenings. She'd been that kind of woman, always something in the air. Clara was different. Clara could sit quiet for an hour, and it didn't mean anything bad. It just meant she was thinking or resting or just being. I liked that. I didn't have a lot of room in me for performance. I also noticed in February that I was looking for reasons to be in the same room with her, not doing anything about it, just finding reasons. The stove needed checking. The lamp wick wanted trimming. Things that had not required my presence in any evening for the previous year and a half suddenly seemed to. I noticed myself doing it, and I told myself to stop. I didn't stop. The thing with the deed came up in late February. It was an old dispute, older than me on this land, a question about the back 40, the creekside parcel, that had never been cleanly settled when my father bought the place from the Holt family in 1871. Old Walter Holt's grandson had come back to the county with papers he said proved the parcel was his, and he had a lawyer, and I had a handshake from a dead man, more or less. It was the kind of thing that could go very badly. I told Clara about it at supper, not because I needed her counsel, but because I realized later I'd started talking to her about things, just things that happened, the day's events, problems I was turning over, the way you talk to someone who's become part of the house. She listened. When I was done, she said, "The Territorial Records Office in Helena will have the original survey. The Holts would have filed the deed transfer in 1871. Get the survey. You'll have the boundary in the government's own hand." I looked at her. My father disputed a parcel. It took him 3 years, and it cost him money he didn't have, but he won it because the survey was clean. She said it plain, like information. I wrote to Helena the next morning. The survey came in 6 weeks, clear as she'd said it would be, and the Holt grandson's lawyer withdrew his claim before it got to a judge. 2 weeks of worry, 1 letter done. I thought about how long I might have sat on that if she hadn't been at supper that night, how I might have just ground my teeth through it alone. March brought mud and new calves and the particular grinding exhaustion of a ranch in spring, but it was the good kind, the kind where you're tired because things are coming back to life and you're part of it, not because you're just trying to survive. I felt it shift. The whole operation felt different, and some of that was the season, but some of it was just the house. Coming in from the cold to a house that was warm and fed and going. 3 kids who were, against everything, doing all right. One evening in late March, I was coming up from the barn and I stopped. The kitchen window was lit up and I could see Clara at the stove and me on the chair beside her reaching up for something. And I could hear Owen in the background saying something, and then Jesse's laugh, which I hadn't heard enough of in 14 months, and there it was. I stood in the cold yard and I listened to my daughter laugh. I stood there too long. When I finally went in, I didn't say anything about it, but Clara looked at me when I came through the door, just a look, quick, and then back to the stove, and I think she knew I'd been out there. It got harder to keep things where I was keeping them after that. I made it until April. It was a Sunday, late afternoon, and Denny had taken the children to see his sister's new baby in town, which meant the house was empty for the first time in, I don't know, a long time. I was oiling the saddles in the tack room and Clara came in and sat on the bench and we talked about nothing for a while, the calves, the planting schedule, whether the creek would flood this year, and then we ran out of nothing and just sat. "I've been thinking about moving on," she said. "Everything stopped." "End of spring," she said. "You've got it under control now, you're through the worst of it, and I don't want to stay past where I'm useful." I set down the cloth I was holding. "Where would you go?" "I've got a cousin in Bozeman, there's work there." I looked at the saddle for a while. There were about 15 things I could have said, and I went through most of them in my head and discarded them, and then I just said the true one. "I don't want you to go." She didn't say anything. "Not because of the work," I said. "Not because of the children, though that too. Because of me, because of what it's like to have you here." I stopped. I'm not a man who finds these words easy. I don't know what to do with that exactly. I'm not asking you to do anything with it either. I can't let you ride out without you knowing. She looked at me for a long time, long enough that I started to wish I'd kept my mouth shut. Then she said, "I thought you were still in love with her." "I am," I said. "I always will be. I'm not going to tell you otherwise." "I know," she said it quietly. "I loved Thomas the same way, 4 years ago, and I still reach over sometimes in the night." She looked at her hands. "But I'm not dead, Elias, and neither are you." I looked at her. "I wasn't going to say anything," she said. "I thought it was better to leave clean." "Is that still what you want?" She thought about it. Really thought, which I'd come to understand was how she did things. She didn't rush herself, didn't perform certainty she didn't have. "No," she said, "it's not." I reached over and took her hand. That was all. We sat in the tack room with the April light coming in sideways and the horses moving in their stalls, and I held her hand and we didn't talk for a while. The children got home at supper time and nothing was different, not really, not outwardly. But Clara looked at me across the table when I passed the biscuits and I looked back and there it was between us, whatever it was, something that had weight and truth to it. I didn't rush anything. She didn't either. That was part of what made sense about us. Neither of us was in a hurry to get somewhere. We were both people who'd had things and lost them, and we knew the difference between holding something carefully and squeezing it until it broke. We talked evenings, really talked. About Ruth some she asked, and I could tell her things I hadn't told anyone because she wasn't made uncomfortable by it. About Thomas too. What kind of man he'd been, what she'd loved about him, how it had been at the end. We traded those things like people who understand that the past isn't a rival, it's just the country you came from. I asked her once what made her stay that first year, before any of this. "Me," she said without hesitating. "Me and that sound the barn door makes." "What sound?" "That grinding. Every morning, every evening, like the place was asking for something and nobody was answering." She paused. "You were so far inside yourself, I kept thinking, who's going to answer it?" I didn't say anything to that. It was too accurate. "Also," she said, and there was something different in her voice, "you never once made me feel like I was just help." I said, "You were never just help." The question came in May, on a Saturday morning, and it came from a place I didn't expect. I was in the barn doing the early feeding. Clara was up at the house, and I heard the kids come in. I could tell from the voices, all 3 together. Me first, then Owen's lower register, then Jessie trying to hush them both. I figured they were after breakfast and I went on with what I was doing. Then I heard the barn door and all 3 of them came in, and they were in their good clothes, which they had not been when I'd last seen them, and they had their hair combed. Even Owen had his hair combed, which took some doing, and they were arranged in front of me with a seriousness that made something in my chest do something complicated. Me went to her knees first, then Owen, Then Jessie, slower, like she wasn't entirely sure this was a good idea, but she wasn't going to let her little sister do it alone. 3 of my children, kneeling in the hay on the barn floor. "What are you doing?" I said. "We talked," Jessie said. "Owen's idea." I looked at Owen. He was looking at his boots. "We want to ask her," me said. "We want to ask if she'll stay." "Stay how?" I said. Though I knew. "Stay like our ma," me said. "Be our ma, our permanent one." Owen looked up. "We know she's not," he stopped, tried again. "We know she's not ma, we know that." "Yeah," I said. "But she's here," he said. "And she's good." He said it like that settled it. The way a 9-year-old settles things that older people tie in knots. Jessie said, "We just want to ask her. Is that all right? Can we ask?" I looked at my 3 children on their knees in the hay, dressed in their Sunday best, asking permission to ask a woman if she'd be their mother. The barn door behind them needed greasing. The light was coming in through the gaps in the siding the way it does in May, those long slanted bands. One of the mares was moving in her stall. "Get up," I said. They got up. "I'll talk to her first," I said. "You'll ask her," me said. "I'll ask her," I said. The way Jessie's face went, not childlike, not exactly, but something tight went out of it that I hadn't realized was there. That was the thing I kept. I went up to the house. Clara was in the kitchen and she looked up when I came in and she knew something had happened. She always could read my face. I'd stopped trying to hide things from her months ago. I said, "The children are going to come in here and ask you something." "All right," she said. "Before they do, I need to ask you something." She set down what she was holding. I said, "I'm not talking about arrangements. I'm not talking about the ranch or the children or anything practical, because we're both past the point where we need to sell it that way." I said, "I want to marry you because of who you are to me, because of what it's like to have you next to me, because you came in and answered something that needed answering and I didn't even know it needed answering, and that's not a small thing." She looked at me. Her eyes were bright, which was the only sign. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll go get them," I said. "Go get them." I went to the barn door and I said, "Come on." And they came, all 3 of them, me running, Owen walking fast, Jessie trying to look composed and failing at it. And they went in through the kitchen and I stood in the doorway while me asked the question she'd been holding all morning. "Will you be our ma forever?" Clara looked at me, and then up at Owen, and then at Jessie for a moment. Jessie, who'd been holding things together for over a year and was ready to set it down. And then she went down on one knee so she was at me's level and she said, "I would like that very much." Me made a sound I can't describe and threw herself at Clara and Clara caught her and held on. And Owen, who had been careful for months, who'd been watching and deciding, crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and put his arms around both of them. And Clara's hand came up and pressed against the back of his head. Jessie didn't move for a second. Then she crossed too, slower, and Clara reached out one arm and pulled her in and held all 3 of them there on the kitchen floor. And I leaned in the doorway with my arm across the frame and didn't try to be in it. It wasn't mine to be in. It was theirs. After a minute, Clara looked up at me over their heads. I didn't say anything. She didn't either. But her eyes said it, something about steadiness, something about staying, something about the particular look a woman gives a man when she's chosen him in plain sight, and she wants him to know she means it all the way. We married in June, small and plain, a minister, Denny, and his wife, a couple of the neighbors. Clara wore a blue dress she'd made herself. Me threw flowers she'd picked from the creek bank, which was mostly just grass, but she believed in it. Owen stood straight the whole time like it was his job to make the thing official, which I suppose he thought it was. Jessie cried. She denied it afterward, but she cried. I greased the barn door hinges the week after the wedding. Not because I finally got to it, I'd been meaning to for months. I did it because Clara mentioned, in passing, the morning of the day I did it, that it sounded like the place was asking for something and getting an answer. I wanted to keep answering it. That was 11 years ago now. Owen is 20, working the North Pasture like he built it himself. Jesse is married, living 2 counties over, writes every month. Me is 17 and has her mother's eyes, Clara's eyes, I mean. She'd tell you the same, and she can sit a horse better than anyone I've seen except the woman who taught her. The ranch is still standing, better than standing. I'm not a man who believes in second chances, as a rule. I've seen too many men wait for one and waste the one they had in front of them. But I know what came through my gate that November morning on a roan mare, and I know what it cost her to stay and what it cost me to let her, and I know what it was worth. It was worth everything. Some things you hold on to, some things hold on to you. The difference matters less than you'd think when it's the right thing. Clara is in the kitchen right now. I can hear her in there. The particular sound of it, cup on the table, stove lid, her footstep on the floor. I've had that for 11 years, and I have never once taken it for something ordinary. The barn door doesn't squeak anymore.